Okay, perfect. Thank you for reminding me there.
Yeah, I
Oh my
wouldn't want to
God.
go through the whole thing and then find out, oh, we didn't
Yeah.
record.
So, number one, thank you for taking the time, and this doesn't have to go long.
You're
The
welcome.
podcast is named For Our Loved Ones. Um, the genesis of it, I kind of got the idea. Well, my mother back in the 90s had the idea because her mother, my grandma, was born somewhere around 1908 and passed away in the 90s. So
Mhm.
my mom had the idea like, can you imagine what she saw in her life?
Yeah.
And the stories she could tell. And she's like, I wish I would have just sat down even with an audio recorder um, and talked to her about it. Because then it's documented in an audio form you can pass on to generations of family and friends, and they can hear the person they're learning about tell the story themselves instead of just reading it in a journal or something.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, and then my mom passed away last year, so that was kind of the impetus. Because now I'm like, I wish I would have done it with her.
Yeah.
So after that happened, I have to start doing this. And yeah, it's just a way to talk to people, find out about their lives, the people that in their lives that were important to them, things that they cared about, and just have it in a video file that can be passed on to generations. Our children and their children's children, and so on.
Hey
Um,
Ken, I when you're forward like that, I can only see from
oh, okay.
this down. So there you go.
That right. And I do I do talk animated, so I might move back and forth. But yeah,
Well,
perfect.
you're safe now.
Okay, I just needed to tilt the screen. So that was the impetus of it. Um, and you are going to be, I think, episode 10, I believe. I'm only 10 in, so I do have to say it's very humbling that I'm only 10 episodes in and I already have somebody who's famous.
Yeah, I'm Matt's dad, you know.
I see, and that's what I appreciate about you because that's how you think of yourself. In doing some preparation for this, I found your talk at Google you did a few years ago, I think.
Yep.
And I've watched it several times actually, so I know a lot of stuff. I remember a lot of stuff from that. So again, talk about whatever you want and whatever you don't want to talk about. Obviously, we don't have to talk about.
Yeah. I don't have any limitations. You know,
Okay,
my dad passed a year ago, May,
okay,
this coming May.
okay. So we can relate to each other on that.
Absolutely.
It was a unique experience for me. I have noticed since it happened with my mom. Almost feel like ever since then something has changed in me where I'm almost an exposed nerve, if that makes sense.
Mm,
I cry more easily about everything.
sure.
I did this authors event this past weekend in Cannon Beach. Matthew may have told you about it because I had asked him a long time ago if you might want to be a guest there. But anyway, I found myself while listening to one of the authors talk about her book and the inspiration. I had to exit the room because I started tearing up,
Yeah.
and it was yeah. So something about going through losing my mom and it's not necessarily in a bad way. I almost feel like I'm
No.
connecting more with people.
Yeah, it's how the heart leaks. You know, and people, what do they say? A joy shared doubles it, and a sorrow shared halves it.
Okay, I haven't heard that, but I like that.
I do too.
That's a very good expression. So let's just kind of get into it. You were born in Canada, if I remember right, but then ended
Mhm.
up going to New Guinea at 1 year old,
Yep. Yep.
and
Grew
you
up in
and
the
you and
Highlands.
you
Yep.
lived there until what age?
Just right around 10 years old, then came back to Canada.
Okay.
So it's my first dreaming language was not English.
Yes, I remember that from your talk at Google. I like the way you state that your dreaming language was not English. Kind of kind of expand on what you mean by that by the using phrasing it that way.
Yeah, so you know, as a child, I didn't know any other reality except for the
Yeah.
tribal people until I went to boarding school. And so you know, their dialect was my language. You know, I spoke English, but that was for my parents, but everything else that I did was in Donnie. And so to know how deeply entrenched I was, when I dreamed in Donnie, the dialect.
Oh my. Okay. So you meant that literally. You literally dreamed in that
Literally.
language.
Yep, literally.
Wow.
Yeah. And it wasn't until we came back to Canada and I had lived in Canada for some time did that change, that my English then
Okay.
was
So
my
you,
dreaming
from
language.
age one, when you're just starting to learn, obviously, you kind of
Yeah.
learned English and the native language concurrently.
Yeah, exactly. So when I was 5 years old, Wycliffe came in to translate the language. So they were going to translate it, translate the New Testament and all that into Donnie.
Okay.
And I was their informant, which is a technical term. When you're doing
Okay.
translation work, it's the person who can speak both languages fluently.
Okay.
And when they started working with me on the language, they found peculiarities that they had never seen before in any other language, but it was natural to me.
Oh, okay.
And they didn't realize that a simple rolled L would change the meaning of a word from one thing to a completely other thing.
Oh, okay. And you, since you could do both, you could you understood that maybe a phrase or a word didn't translate directly.
Correct. So they would say, well, that means this. And I'd say, no, it doesn't. Right.
Okay.
Because they weren't picking it up. So I had to repeat it. And then they go like, oh my gosh. In the world of translation, we've never heard that. And it was a peculiarity that they found only in one other language in the world since then. So,
And you were, so you said you were there until 10 years old. So you're still a child when you're doing this work.
oh yeah, 5 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And then they sent me to boarding school.
Boarding school in New Guinea?
Yeah. On the coast. It was
Okay.
on the coast. And so it was a missionary boarding school. And it was quite a shock because I was now dropped into a different culture. I mean, and for the first time, I was consciously surprised that I was white. I didn't have that conscious awareness prior to that.
Because when you were with the tribal culture, it just wasn't an issue.
Yeah. So when I talked about my parents, the moniker was their Mungats, which is a dialect that they have for ghosts, So
Okay.
they're white, they're ghost people. And the thing about ghost people, they can't have any children. And so when my mother would take the airplane up into heaven and come back with a baby, it's because that's what ghost people do. They can't have a baby themselves, so they go to heaven and get one.
Oh, that was
Yeah.
the what's the word I'm looking for?
The understanding of the
Yeah.
culture.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was in fact, they didn't think that we were actually human beings until my dad brought in these big Yorkshire hogs, and their pigs are small and runty, have straight little tails, and these white pigs were ghost pigs because they were white. And then when they had piglets, it was like, oh my gosh, they're human beings. And because so it was the pigs having piglets that made them aware that we were actually human and not ghosts.
Okay.
But I never thought of myself as a ghost person. I always thought of myself as a Donnie.
Okay.
And so that's why it was a shock when I went to boarding school that it was like, oh my gosh, I'm a person without substance. I'm a ghost. And
So boarding school for how long?
I was there, well, until I was 10 years old, and then ripped
Okay.
out of there and dropped into Canada in the middle of winter.
Oh,
And
geez.
it's huge culture shock.
Because you'd obviously had no memory of Canada.
No,
Yes.
nope, no memory of snow and all of that kind of stuff. So
Was the move back for like a job thing for your father or your mother? Or?
in part, but there was other complexities that I didn't know about for years and years and years.
Okay.
And yeah, so
Okay.
it was a combination of things, but I was unaware. I'm the firstborn, so at some point you thought that they would have told me, but they didn't. I had to find out
So
myself.
you have siblings.
Yeah. So Debbie is number two, and then Tim, and our youngest was the youngest in the family was Stephen, but he was killed the day after he was killed when he was 18. Debbie's first child, Jennifer, was killed the day after her 5th birthday.
Oh, geez. Okay.
So, yeah.
So you have and your siblings, are they in the area or where do they
They're
live?
in Canada, and I'm
Okay.
in just north of Portland, Oregon. So as you know,
Yeah, yeah. Okay. And when you came back to Canada at age 10, was it the Western Canada, British Columbia?
Central. I was in Saskatchewan, so I was in Saskatoon, and from there, my dad started he was an itinerant preacher, so he started taking churches. So I went to 13 schools by the time I graduated high school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So moving around a lot. Okay. Parents were still married?
Oh yeah. Still
Okay.
married. And so my mom died 3 years ago, and my dad died a year ago.
Okay.
So
So staying in Can and then at what after high school, I'm curious when you met
went
Kim.
well, so what happened was I went to Canadian Bible College, which was the religious institution that my parents had both graduated from in Saskatchewan. And it's very rigorous. The education there was um, very hard, very good. And so in my third year as a junior, I was junior class president. I was one of the top students in the school, and I was working my way through school. So I depended on the scholarships and my job, the job I took was part-time, but it was a rock and roll disc jockey at CK Radio, and which was sort of when you're in a rigorous Western evangelical Bible college, that's sort of an anomaly. But I'm a missionary kid, so we got away with some stuff. And but when they posted my scholarships that year, my name wasn't on any of them. And my friends go to the administration and go like, how come Paul's not on any of the scholarships? And they said, well, we've determined he's not a good investment for the denomination. And they were right. I wasn't. But I never graduated from there. From there, I went up to north of Edmonton, Alberta, into the Syncrude oil projects.
Okay.
And I worked for 6 months doing 712s.
Oh,
And
wow.
in a 6,000 man oil camp north of Fort McMurray. But I made all the money I needed to pay off all my debts and have enough to then go somewhere to finish my education.
Okay.
So that was then. I was accepted at a number of schools. I decided to go down to California, but I had a crossroads experience in Gresham, Oregon. And from there, I made the decision that I needed to stay in this area. So I went down there, told them I wasn't coming, came back in my $250 Mazda GLC. No, it wasn't a GLC, it was a little station wagon. And I bought for $250. And came back, looked for a school. The only one still taking students was Warner Pacific College. So I went to Warner and then graduated there. East Hill Church with Jerry Cook was out in East County, and they were a place that I sort of settled into. And then they asked me to come on staff as their college leader, which it was a huge church at the time. Our college group was anywhere from 300 to 700, depending on the time of year. And so I'm like 22 years old in charge of the 20 to 30-year-olds. And when we had kind of the going thing in Portland at the time, it was a big deal. But one night, Kim comes in to visit at Encounter. It was called Encounter, to visit with 2 of her 5 sisters, because people are hearing about this thing. And I spot her. And so I changed what we were planning to do so we could break up into groups of 2 and pray for each other.
Very smart.
Oh no, highly manipulative. And so, that's how I met Kim. And we became friends. And then I was almost killed in, a 17-year-old high-risk driver down here on Division Street, right across from the church. At the time, the church was up on the hill. And he hit me doing a lot, right around 50 to 55 miles an hour. And I was a pedestrian. And he
Oh my gosh.
knocked me 2 houses down the street.
Oh.
I was a wreck. They took me to the hospital, did some surgery without anesthetic. When I came, well, they didn't want me to throw me into a really deep coma that I couldn't get out of. So, but I don't remember that, thank goodness. But when I came to conscious awareness a couple days later, I had complete amnesia. That is, I didn't know what country I was in. I didn't know what year it was. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know who walked in the door. And the only relationship that made it through that was Jesus. I knew I had a relationship with Jesus.
Okay.
And so up to that point in my life was probably the most peaceful time in my existence. I had no baggage. I'd never hurt anybody. I was not addicted to anything. And it was just, you know, it was like, but you know, my memories start coming back. And that memory came with all the baggage. But I collected most of it. I was able to get most of my memory back, but there were some things I never got back, including this relationship with this girl who I've been told, but you know, there's different opinions about it, that I was kind of serious about her. And
We're talking about Kim.
No.
Oh, another girl. Okay.
Another girl.
Okay.
And that accident just obliterated that relationship. I have no memory of it except for one little, to this day, I can remember, right now, I can remember sitting in a car talking to her about something, and that was it.
Okay.
You know, but you know, it's not like you can build a relationship on that. And
right.
So that was gone, and as a result of that, Kim and my relationship grew, and I ended up marrying her, and she ended up saving my life. And so that was kind of a mess.
Yeah, it is funny is maybe the wrong word, but it is. I was going to say it's funny how our wives tend to do that. I can kind of relate. Since I met my wife 11 years ago, I'm not even the same person in a lot of good ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most men marry up.
Oh gosh, I totally did. I question
too.
I question all the time, why are you with me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was you said the crossroads experience in Gresham that stopped you from going to California wasn't related to Kim, I take it.
No. It was related to faith. It was related to all the garbage that I carried with me. You know, I had sexual abuse in the tribal culture and sexual abuse in the boarding school, and my dad was a furious man, and I didn't know a lot about my dad's history, so I didn't know that his dad had broken him before I ever showed up,
right?
And his dad before him. So all I knew that he terrified me, and so you know, all of that baggage that you keep, you know, as long as you store it and keep your secrets, that stuff leaks out as poison in one way or the other. And I was really in trouble. And a friend of mine who happened to be a psychologist up in Canada, he said, you know, there's a guy in this little town called Gresham that I think you need to stop by and spend a couple days just hanging around with him. And his name is Bill. So I had no reason not to. So I stopped there and spent a few days with Bill. And it turns out I'm very rational, kind of, you know, my defense mechanisms are all in my rationality and in intelligence. Although most of my life to that point, all of my life to that point, I didn't actually believe that I was smart. I just thought I was good at fooling people. And
you had imposter syndrome.
Yeah, a big way. And so Bill turned out to be this guy who, the way he lived had nothing to do with creating, you know, intellectual barriers. And I'd shut my emotions down, and Bill had actually been a warlock and had a very confrontive situation with Jesus and lost. And as a result, he became a Jesus follower. He went back and 23 of the 24 witches he had trained, he invited successfully to enter a relationship with Jesus. And so it had changed all their lives. And Bill and I sat in a sauna at his apartment complex, and he read my mail. He knew exactly the stuff that was going on inside of me. And it was so revealing and exposing that I figured, you know, I need to hang around here. And that was a big crossroads for me, to not go to Los Angeles, to decide to stay in this area and finish my undergraduate degree, which I did. And so a lot happened because, well, here I am still in the area after all these years and having 6 kids, and we're waiting on our 16th grandchild. And
yeah. So it sounds like obviously the way you were raised, a missionary and all that, you were raised with religion, but it sounds like this experience with Bill changed your relationship to your faith.
Yeah, so I always kind of had this real chip on my shoulder about religion. Religion didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And I grew up very steeped in religious thinking, but so much of it just didn't make any sense to me. And yes, to some degree I'd had a sense of a relationship, but it was Jesus, but not God the Father. God the Father was this ambivalent, depending on your performance criteria,
Yeah.
So you had to perform to win the affection, and it was, and that's, I had a real split between the nature of Jesus and the nature of God as Father. But a lot of that was, I painted God with the face of my own dad.
Yes,
And
I remember you saying that at the Google.
yeah, yeah. And so there was a lot about that where I just struggled with that. Plus, I had all this damage and I had all this abuse history, and I kept it all secret. I kept my addiction secret, and I drug him into my marriage, and until they all blew up. Everything blew up. And Kim she was born in Minot, North Dakota, and she has 5 sisters and 2 brothers. And her and her 5 sisters are called the Force. May the Force be with you, So
Amen.
so when I completely betrayed her, she caught me in a 3-month affair with one of her best friends. And the world blew up. And I had to make the decision, is there a possibility to change, or do I just kill myself? Because suicide is the last way to run away before you hit the bottom.
Yes.
And I had always had this companion, this door out, which was suicide. And when you live inside of shame and fear your life for the majority of your life, it's almost a relief to know that door is there. And instead, I decided to face her. And that got me into some counseling in Clackamas County. And that started an 11-year journey of reconciliation with Kim. And I did the work, and it was hell. It was so hard. I'd never want to go through anything like that again, but I'm grateful every day for it. And it totally dismantled my belief system, totally dismantled, my commitment to hiding and keeping secrets, because we are as sick as the secrets we keep.
And it poisoned you.
Yeah, and they leak poison out into all your relationships. It's like the secrets create little doors that you can run through in a way. And but then, people who keep secrets have to have really good memories, because you don't remember who you told what to.
Yes.
And anyway, I didn't live from the inside out. I lived from the outside in. That means that I created a persona depending on the situation I was in. So all the characteristics of sexual abuse survivors, and that is hypervigilant. I knew the doors and the windows and where things were, and I could read a room really well. And if somebody started to crack one of the ways that, because lies for abuse victims is a survival skill. It's not an intent to fool people or to mislead people. It's meant to keep safe.
Right.
And so when somebody starts to break through, you either have to go and work it out, which meant I was really good with language, or you run. You go move somewhere else. And when this happened, it was like, all right, I got to start from scratch. And I pulled my therapist out of the yellow pages. And for those of us who grew up in the kind of world that I did, therapy at that time was tantamount to, it's really on the edge of going to hell, yeah, but I was desperate, and Scott was the first person in my life I ever said to anybody, can you help me? And he said, yeah, but it's going to take a long time. So that started the beginning of that 11 years. And by the end of that 11 years, I was a completely different person. And Kim watched, and she was not easy on me at all, and which is good. absolutely thankful, because partly because of the intensity of her fury, I stayed and stuck with it. And so that was 11 years. It led up to my 50th year, the year I turned 50. And I finally felt healthy. I felt I didn't have any addictions. I didn't have any secrets. I was the same person in every situation. Joy had become a constant companion. I finally knew what it was like to be a child and live like a child, and stay within the present moment rather than create imaginations that don't exist based on fear. So, be able to receive love, be able to give love, those kinds of things. And that's when I decided to write a little story for my kids. Kim had been asking me for like 4 years.
Yes, yes. So
Yeah.
you and her response was, well, I thought it would be a few pages.
Yeah, exactly. 4 to 6, and I was working 3 jobs at the time. I was working downtown, took the max from Gresham. We were living in a little tiny rental house.
You had some of the children at this point? I mean,
Yes.
all of them?
Yeah, but 2 of them were on full ride scholarships in universities. But
Okay.
four of them were in the house. So we had 2 little small bedrooms and 1 bathroom in the house. It's right in Gresham, and just a couple blocks from Gresham High School.
Okay.
And then we created a make-believe one in the basement for the boys. And
For young Matthew?
well, Matthew was one of them,
Yeah.
and who was home? Andrew. Either Nicholas or Andrew. I'd have to think about it. But amongst all the hanging clotheslines and all that stuff, So we had nothing. And so I wrote The Shack as a gift for my kids for Christmas. Made 15 copies at the Office Depot in Gresham on their photocopier. Put a little plastic thing on the side and a little plastic cover.
Yeah.
And made those 15 copies, did everything I wanted it to do. I had no push to ever become a published author. It wasn't on my bucket list. And I went back to work, went back to my 3 jobs.
At what point in your younger years, when did the writing bug first happen? Had you always written, or?
Yeah, it started with reading. Reading was an escape.
Yes.
Reading was to get out of the world that I was in. And writing started to become a way to get my inside world out. And so, a lot of the early writing I did was really dark. And then I had to destroy it because I didn't want my dad to find it. It was too honest. Mm-hmm. And then over the years, I'd started to write little gifts for people, whether it was poetry or short stories or songs. I'd write as gifts. And but that's all I'd ever done, and to write an entire book, so that was a surprise, but it was surprisingly easy. Even working 3 jobs, I was able to do it in 6-7 months.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Well, Christmas was coming.
Yeah.
So,
well, you had a deadline.
I did. I had a deadline. And so gave the kids, it's like, oh, a book. Thanks, Dad. And Matthew was 12 at the time, I think, 13, maybe 13. And he was the youngest of the 6. But eventually they read it. Eventually Kim even read it. And it had an impact. And again, those 15 copies completed my entire desire for what that little book would do, and I went back to work doing my 3 jobs, and
and at some point this little manuscript gets on some editor's radar, I guess.
No, what happened is that I have a bunch of friends and I had extra copies because we only needed 6, 7, 8 of them. Right. So 7 extra copies. So I gave them to my friends. Okay. And they start giving it to their friends. We actually collected another little pile of cash to make 15 more copies so that my friends could give it to their friends who I didn't know. And those guys and gals started reading it and sending me emails because the book had impacted them so deeply. And I'm like, these emails are unbelievable, but what am I supposed to do with them? And so I'd actually met a for real author one Saturday because he needed a driver around Portland and took them up to Multnomah Falls and stuff like that. And so I had his email. So I sent him an email going like, hey, I wrote this little thing. I'm getting these emails, for example, send him an example. What do you do about this? You're an author, you know? And he goes, what did you write? I said, oh, this story. I wrote this story for my kids. He said, can I see it? I said, yeah. Send him a copy electronically. And he calls me back. It's on a Friday night. And he says, you know, I get asked to read a lot of people's writing. And boy, do I understand that. I got stacks, right?
Oh, yeah.
And he says, so it might take me a while to read this. And I'm like, I don't care if you read it at all. I just want to know what to do with these emails. And he says, and this is all through email, he and I. And he goes, I'll get back to you. Okay. Monday night, he calls me on the phone and he goes, what were you thinking sending me that manuscript? And I got, just throw it out. You know, I didn't mean to offend you. He goes, no, you don't understand. I can't print the pages fast enough. He goes, Paul, I don't remember reading anything where my response was, I got 10 or 12 people I need to send this to, like right now. I said, I don't care, send it to him. He goes, I already did. And so that conversation started to be, and I knew nothing about publishing or what it took or being an author or any of that stuff. But that conversation started the ball rolling that eventually we had a manuscript ready, you know, to send to publishers. So we did 26 of them, and all of them turned it down. And it was like, I don't care. You know, this is not my identity. This is all some kind of crazy, funny adventure.
Yeah.
And so they turned it down. The secular publishers thought it had too much Jesus in it. And the Christian faith-based publishers thought it was too edgy. And it is pretty edgy. Oh, yeah. When you have God the Father as a large Black African-American woman, it causes some, you know, consternation among my people. And so all of this stuff was going on. And I'm like, how hard is it to publish a book? I don't know. And two of the guys in California who wanted to turn it into a movie from the beginning, they said, well, we've been wanting to create a publishing house to do our own stuff. So we're going to do that. So they did. They created a publishing house for like $500, and suddenly I had a publisher.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So May of 2007, I wrote the book in 2005. May of 2007, they'd found a printer, and the first, we ordered 10,000 copies. I borrowed it from a friend of mine, Jan Weston of the Weston Auto people out in Gresham.
Yeah.
Right. Good friends, trustworthy friends. And he loaned me my third of the first print run. And then one of the guys had some savings and the other one had a Visa and a MasterCard. So we ordered 10,000 copies, which people have told us, you know, that's like 8,000 in your garage after you've run out of friends and family. And because I didn't know this, but the average book only sells between 3,000 and 4,000 copies in its lifetime.
Yeah.
And less than 0.5% of all books ever makes it, let alone fiction, ever makes it to 50,000. But if you can reach 100,000 of a work of fiction, Hollywood will come talk to you because it is so highly unusual.
So that's the standard.
That's the standard. And I didn't know that. And so and they sent us 11,000 copies. It's called overage. Oh, we made an extra 1,000 by mistake, but you owe us for them.
Okay,
and so now we have 10,000 in one of the guys' garages, and he volunteered to ship the books out at night because he's putting people's sprinkler systems during the day, you know. And I'm back up in Portland working my 3 jobs. And the goal they had was, okay, we're going to get through these 11,000 copies in 2 years. And then we'll work our way over 5 years to get to 100,000 copies. Then Hollywood will call them and they can make a movie. So that was the big picture. So I'm back doing my thing, you know, loving on my kids and my family and working these 3 jobs. And 3.5 months later. So May, June, July, middle of August. I get a call from California, and I knew we were giving lots of books away, and I was actually selling some out of the back of my car. I'd meet people on the freeway, and we'd pull over, and they'd give me money, and I give them a box of something, and my funniest one was in the Gresham little mall up on Division. A police officer wanted to meet me, and so we met at Starbucks there. And so at the end of it, he goes, "Can I buy a case of books?" And I said, "Sure." So he pulls his cruiser around behind my car, and I start laughing because we're out there. Here's a cop handing me money, and I'm giving him a box of something. It's so great. And so 3.5 months into this, I get a call. "We need to order more books." I'm like, "Man, did we just give them all away?" And he goes, "No. People, the only place you could buy the book was on the website. The only place you could find the website was at the back of the book." I mean, it's such creative nonsense. But people were coming, they'd buy a copy, then they'd come back and they'd buy 5 copies, and then they come back and they'd buy a whole case. And I didn't know that. So we ordered 20,000 copies. They delivered 22,000 copies, and we went through that in 60 days.
Wow.
We then went through 33 copies in 30 days. And we're going like, what is going on? And then people were showing up at Barnes and Noble, for example, or Christian Supply or whatever, and they were asking for the book, and people would look it up and say, "I'm sorry, it doesn't exist. It's not in anybody's computer system." Who's the publisher? Who's the publisher? They would go, Windblown Media. They'd look up that. Sorry, it doesn't exist. Right? Because it was a new publishing house. Nobody knew that it existed. The book is not on anybody's computer systems. So they backtracked, found us, and Barnes and Noble goes, "Hey, we're really excited about your little book. Could you send us your marketing promotion plan so that we can get on board?" And we're like, "Can you send one we can cut and paste?"
Yep.
And they laughed and they hung up. And we're like, "What is that all about?" And we had no distribution network at all. And 2 weeks later, Barnes and Noble calls us back and says, "Hey, you know what? Normally, we will put somebody's book." They're usually a publisher that has at least 5 to 10 imprints. That's different books. But for a big dollar price, we will put their books at the front of our store nationwide. Would you consider us doing that for you for 3 months for free?
Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding. So they did. And, and there was a distributor who came to us and said, "You know what? We're really excited about this book. So anytime there is an order that is large enough, we will put your truck at the front of our truck line." And so they were expediting this thing. And in 13 months, from May of 07 to the end of June of 08, 13 months, we spent less than $267, I think was what it was, on marketing and advertising, and we shipped 1.1 million copies of The Shack.
Oh my gosh.
I know. And then Hachette got involved. The guys made a deal with Hachette, and they took it internationally, and it went nuts.
Wow.
I know. Crazy, right? And we're just like, so I was kind of nervous about this whole thing, and I ended up finally quitting my 3 jobs. And Kim worked at the high school bakery in Gresham, and we quit our jobs February of 08 with great trepidation.
Yeah,
right? Because
I was gonna ask at some point as these books keep selling, you start getting nervous where this is getting big, and
Yeah.
I have no experience in this world.
Yeah.
There's a lot of business financial decisions that somebody's going to have to make.
Well, it's not just that. I was getting invitations, multiple invitations every day to go talk, to go speak somewhere in the world, right? And it was just crazy. And thankfully, I had found a friend in Nashville, Wes Yoder. of Ambassador Speakers Bureau. He called me and he said, Paul, you don't know me, but I think you have no idea what's coming. And I didn't. And he said, I really feel that God has told me to put everything that we do at your disposal for no charge.
Wow.
So I knew instantly that I trusted this man. And we just got back, Kim and I just got back from Tennessee a few days ago. And every time we go to Nashville, we stay with Wes and Linda. So it's been over this entire course of this whole adventure. And Wes and Linda have become incredibly dear friends. And he's gone with me through the thick and thin of everything, but he began to take over, and I didn't let him not get paid, just for the record. But
Right.
but I knew that he would have been completely willing to do that, no charge whatsoever, for up until now. And but what a gift to us. And then he began to coordinate the speaking engagements and all of that logistics and everything that meant. And that was incredibly helpful. There's even no words for it, but so, it went nuts, and some of the international stuff went nuts in Brazil or South Korea or Germany or whatever. And then, way down the road, 2016, they made the movie, and the guys in California got to make their movie, and it turned out to be quite beautiful. And
I just popped in my head, random question. Obviously, it was translated in several different languages.
yeah, almost 50.
Did it make it to New Guinea?
Great question. It did make it into Indonesian, so I'm sure it's in West Papua. And
Okay.
yeah, so it's in Malay, it's in Indonesia, and but it, 50 different languages. It showed up all over the place.
Yes. Yeah, it would be. Do you still do you have any in contact with anybody from New Guinea from your time there?
Yeah, but they're only the missionary kids or missionaries or people. I haven't been able to get a chance to go because there's a lot of unrest in West Papua. When I put it this way, I have a Canadian passport because I was born in Canada. My sister was born in not Jayapura, Hollandia Binnen, and it was a Dutch colony when she was born. So she had a Dutch passport.
Okay.
My brother Tim, the Dutch left almost overnight because there was a rumble going on with the Indonesians. And so suddenly the Dutch are gone, the Indonesians aren't there, and the UN didn't know what to do. So they took over this half an island. And so my brother Tim was born under UN control. So potentially, if he had, stayed out of jail and stuff, he could have become a UN citizen, which is quite remarkable. But then our youngest brother, Stephen, was born under Indonesian control. Indonesia under Sukarno just annexed the whole half of the island, and they took over. And so he was born in Jayapura, and he had an Indonesian passport. So
Okay.
four kids, 4 passports crossing borders, right?
Yep.
So crazy. And but the Indonesians came in, annexed, started dumping their people into the island. And now there's the unrest between the indigenous tribal people that were there. And part of that is that when we first were there were over 800 unrelated language groups there, right? And so with no trade language at all, no common language.
Yes.
And the Indonesians, they basically took over that entire half an island with all of these tribal folks not having a clue what was going on. And so now they're trying to fight for their rights. The Indonesians, they're not willing to leave. The country has that island has huge natural resources. And so I haven't been able to get back in because when I've tried, there's been a log jam in terms of the safety issues and getting visas and stuff like
that. So let's take a left turn here. Some struggles as a child with your upbringing. How did your relationship with your father eventually heal?
Yeah, in many ways, you know, my my dad, he passed away last May. He was he was 92. And he struggled his whole life to heal. But he didn't really know how. And I didn't let him, because I had all this baggage with him. And so, you know, I had that photograph in my heart, the album, the whole album. And anytime that he would do something that blew things up, I'd open my album and see, he is an SOB, you know? Yeah. And on his 80th birthday, so 12 years before he died, I went to his birthday party up in British Columbia, and sure enough, he did it again. He blew things up. And so I was really angry. So I go out for a walk, and I feel like God put an arm around my shoulder, and we didn't talk for a while. And then I hear, you know, Paul, your dad has not known how to be a father for 60 years. He's not going to suddenly figure it out. And I realized that was the truth. Like, I get that. And then I hear, how about if I be all those things to you and more? And I wanted to say, you're not enough. Right? That's what I wanted to say. You're not enough. And I realized something. I realized that the reason my dad would blow things up is because I would lay traps for him. I had this whole minefield full of expectations of him being a father to me, right? And so I would lead him onto the minefield, and sure enough, he'd step on one and blow things up. And I'm going like, oh my gosh, I'm the one that is largely creating this problem, because I have expectations. And people will say, well, don't you have a right to expect your dad to be a father? And I go, yeah. I mean, we're human beings and we're children, and we need our parents to be there, you know? And you know, when I was young, I didn't know his story. I didn't know how thoroughly trashed he got as a child. And but here I am, you know, he's 80. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I did something. And I think this is incredibly helpful, not just for me, but for other people. I allowed my dad to finally become something bigger than my father. And that was to become a human being. Because father is a subset of human being. Because not everybody's a father. You know, half the world doesn't have the capacity to be a father, right? Because they're women. And so I let my dad become something greater, and I began to relate to him not as my father, of which I had a huge amount of expectations. I allowed my dad to become human. And because here's the crazy thing, a lot of times we can love a stranger, a human being, better than we can love those who we are enmeshed with in one sort. And we know the ones that we're close to. And because of that knowledge, our capacity for love is greater, because love is always the skin of knowing. So the more you know someone, the broader your capacity to love is. And so when I did that, when I allowed my dad to finally become a human being, complete with all the flaws, with all the history, with all that stuff, our relationship immediately started to change.
That's where I thought you were going with when you use the phrase, you allowed him to become a human being. You allowed him to be flawed.
Yeah, not stuck inside my set of expectations, which he constantly, you know, destroyed.
Right.
And expectations are just prophesied disappointments. They're just disappointments that are on their way. And when you learn to live without expectations, everything's a gift. So when my dad began to change, every little incremental piece of that was a gift. I didn't expect it. And right about now, because he died in May, and right about now, we were on a phone call, and my dad didn't know how to make a phone call. I mean, I'd had 3 major phone calls in my history, and all were tragedies. That's why he called me. Somebody died, that kind of stuff. But in my relationship with my dad, I'd had 2 kind of decent phone calls, one of which I recorded because I didn't know he'd call on my 60th birthday. And he was still struggling to find a way to communicate without being stuck in his, pastoral persona. But he was trying. And then, but I called him. I called him at Christmas, on his birthday, and all this. And over the last number of years, I've started to call him more regularly, and even started to take the risk of asking him questions that I want an answer to. Right. I only got to ask him one of those before he died. And, but then, so I'm talking to him about a year ago, just a few weeks ago, it was a year ago. And at about a couple minutes into the conversation, he says, "Paul, I need to tell you something," which is how he started a tragic conversation, right? "Paul, I need to tell you something." And he says it again, and the little triggers are going off, but I go, "Yeah, Dad?" He says, "No, you really need to hear me." I go, "Okay." There's this pause, and he goes, "Paul, I am really, really, really proud of you. I'm proud of the man you've become. I'm proud of the father you are. I'm proud of the husband you are. I'm proud of the way you've touched the world. And I really, really love you."
Wow.
I know. I didn't expect any of that. And yet, I'd never heard anything like that in my life. It was a gift. It's not a gift that I need, because I know who I am apart from my dad. It took a long time. But as a gift, it just was a relentless embrace of affection, is what it was.
And
I'm so grateful.
it happened before he passed. You got to have that moment with him.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. And so, he dies suddenly, unexpectedly. He lived, both my parents lived with my sister she's a nurse, and she helped take care of them. And so it happened to be speaking up there right after he died. And then, so I did my thing, flew back to Portland, and flew back there to bury him. So the 3 siblings and Debbie's daughter and her family were there, but that was it. He didn't want a big fancy thing.
Yeah.
And I get home from that, and we live in a world where messaging is instant and emails are instant, and so it's unusual when somebody actually writes you a letter with handwritten note, right? Or sends you a card in which there's handwriting. And it's not that the messages in text aren't valuable. They are hugely significant and wonderful, and are gifts in themselves. But to get something written, and I got this card. It was waiting for me when I got home. And you can see it's full of, right, it's all kinds of different script.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is from Nicholas. "I'm sending my condolences and my love to you and your family. My prayers are that you remain strong and at peace, and you remain under the wings of the Most High. Love." And from Akil: "Dear Paul, sending my condolences to you and your family. You're in my prayers. God bless." From Donald Middleburg: "Paul, dude, sorry to hear about your dad. One of the things that helped me with Maggie's passing several weeks ago was the thought of their now comfort." From Harold: "Paul, my heart is with you and your family in your time of grief. Remember, it is in our times of grief that God holds us the closest. Love, your friend." From KB: "Dear Paul, with love, my heart and prayers are with you and your family. Please be strong and very courageous. 1 Thessalonians 4:13 through 18. From Mike Bain: "I'm sorry to hear about your father. Please know that you and your family are in my heart and prayers, sending good thoughts and love." Brother Paul, this is from Purvis: "Brother Paul, my heart goes out to you and your family. Continue to be strong and hold on, my brother. May the love comfort you and console your soul. Take care, my prayers are with you. Stand, my brother, stand." From Terry: "Today, Wes gave me the news that your father passed away. I'm so sorry but I thank God for the gift your father gave you and saying how proud he was of you. And then, and another, sorry to hear about your father, and I send my prayers to you and your family. This beautiful card. These guys, they're friends from Tennessee. They live on death row in Unit 2 at River Bend Maximum Security Prison. These
Wow.
are my friends. And you go like, those guys sent you this? Well, they're not those guys to me. They're my friends, you know? And so every time I'm in Nashville, I go see them, and which has been a bunch of times. And,
Wow.
and so it's like, you know, we have a vengeance justice system that leaves no room for transformation or change. And vengeance doesn't heal anything, you know? And these guys, Terry, probably my best friend on death row, he's been on there for 38 years, since he was 18 years old, high and scared, and nothing justifies murder, and they're very clear about that. They're very clear about that. They're not looking for anybody to give them a pass, you know. But these guys, they love Jesus, and they love those around them. And there's like 48 guys, I think, on death row now. Well, these guys built the table of reconciliation. It's a table that seats 12 people, sits outside their little library. And anybody that has an argument with each other will meet at the table of reconciliation and work it out. And if they can't, usually it's Terry that they call. But Purvis was one of the guys that wrote me a note. Stan, my brother Stan. They botched his execution a few months ago. And since they botched him, it's been proven forensically that he was innocent.
Oh.
Right? Last time I'm there a few weeks ago, a brother sitting across from me, been on death row 41 years, just been proven forensically that he's innocent. 41 years, right?
Who was working for him on it? Was it the part of the Innocence Project that was working for these people?
Yeah, that's part of who the group is. But a lot of times there are lawyers whose hearts have been really touched by one thing or another, and then come in and do this work pro bono.
Yeah.
And there's so many good people out there. So, you know, I'm in the middle of that, and I come home from the death of my dad and the little breakthroughs that my dad and I had. And I have this card from my friends, you know.
That it's funny. I'm not trying to shine a light on somebody else. This is your podcast, but that's what you just talked about with your. I'm assuming you got connected with these people because they read The Shack.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the authors, the one that I had to leave the room this past weekend because I started tearing up, was Lauren Kessler. She writes a lot about that. One of her books is called Free, but she spent time with people that have been incarcerated anywhere from 18 to 30 plus years. She tells their stories, and she kind of talks about that. The crimes are horrible. But one example was Melinda on the streets at age 14 for 4 years as a prostitute. And when she was 18, ends up killing her pimp. She just was afraid, tried to protect herself, didn't mean to kill him, but she stabbed him with something and he died. So she's in prison.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? Now, again, doesn't excuse the act, but what chance did this 14-year-old girl really have?
Yeah.
You know? And the system is not
yeah.
designed to
heal anything.
Rehabilitate them.
Yeah. Yeah. So last Sunday I was in Nashville and I was supposed to meet with the guys, and somebody in the chain of command decided that they weren't worth meeting with. You know, they're just animals that are waiting to die. And I don't know if you're familiar with Cyntoia Brown, but she was on death row for killing her pimp, you know, at 16, I think was when it happened. But she has just been released. And anybody can look her up, but she is an unbelievably powerful human being. And she is out there because 14, 16-year-olds, this is not about their ability to make a choice. You know, I took a friend of mine from Knoxville in to see the guys the last time I was able to go in. And it blew him away. And he says to me, if I'd grown up the way he did, where everybody in the family to survive was either a drug dealer or on drugs, with all this abuse going on, what chance would I have had? You know, it's it's crazy. And then they can't afford any other kind of defense except somebody who's got, you know, 50 cases sitting on his desk. And as he arrives at the court, he opens up for the first time to see what he's supposed to do. And then he makes a deal and tells the guys, this is better. And they end up on death row anyway. And now, even if they didn't do it, they've got this mark that they agreed to confess so that they would have a lighter sentence and not be on death row. And it didn't work out that way.
Yeah.
So, you know, Purvis, who I was telling you about, his IQ is somewhere between 70 and 80. So he's low IQ. He was going to go see a friend in an apartment complex, and the door across from his friend's apartment was ajar. And there was a woman saying, help, 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 because she heard somebody out there. He goes in, 2 children are dead in the apartment. She has a knife stuck in her neck. And she says, get it out, get it out, get it out. So he takes the knife and pulls it out, which it was protecting the woman from the carotid, and blood just goes everywhere, all over Purvis. He tries to call 911, but calls 411 instead by accident. He then hears police showing up because somebody called 911 because they heard whatever. He's got blood all over him. He goes downstairs to tell the police to help. And he's saying, I killed her, because he released the knife. Right? So what do they got? They got a black man who his fingerprints are all on the knife hilt, but they're not anywhere else. They're not on the shaft of the knife. They're not on the handle of the knife. And there's forensic evidence all over the room that is not his, right? At all. Somebody else's. But they've got him, his fingerprints in one spot, and he's confessed, right? Because he said he killed her.
Out of context.
Totally.
Yeah.
And his IQ is 70 to 80. And you're going like, oh my gosh, who missed this? And he's the one that they botched his execution. And now forensically, it's been proven he didn't do it.
That they haven't caught the person that did?
No, but they know the identity, because that person was an abusive boyfriend of the woman who was killed, and his prints and DNA are all over the place, including mixed in with the blood evidence.
Okay.
You know, so this kind of stuff is happening a lot, and there's got to be some resolution. I'm grateful for the states that have just said we're not taking the chance. And but this is also why they're, you know, the lethal injection protocol is so inhumane. It doesn't knock the person out. It freezes them so that they can't respond to the pain they're in. They know that those drugs are incredibly abusive. You know, they feel like they're drowning, and then they feel like they're on fire. And it's crazy. So this is why they're trying to bring back hanging. They're trying to bring back firing squads. And you just go like,
so that's their solution to it.
yeah. And we know that we can put a dog to sleep, but we can't put a human being to sleep if that's what we want to do. And it's because the pharmaceutical companies that make those drugs that put animals to sleep will not sell it to the criminal justice system, because they don't want that on their hands. They don't want the blood of people on their hands. So anyway,
that's interesting.
Totally off the subject.
Yeah, that's interesting though, because we just had to put a dog down 2 weeks ago, and found the person that will come to your house and do it. So it was incredibly well done. We got to spend the last day with this family dog. It was great. So, but that made me think, when you were telling the story about the lethal injection, like, if we can do that to an animal, of course you should be able to do it to a human.
Yeah. And
Um,
but it's because they won't sell them the drugs, you know, and keeping somebody on death row is multiple times more expensive than somebody who's in life incarceration.
yeah,
And then there are things that are happening that are beautiful, like the guys that I know in Angola. I think in Angola they are teaching the death row inmates how to be hospice chaplains for the rest of the Gen Pop, you know,
yeah,
and so there are things when there. I was there 2 weeks before Harold was to be executed. Sweet man. He walks into the area where we're gathering and he says, you know, steel and concrete, they don't have anything to say about freedom. Freedom is what's happening in your own heart. And he had 2 weeks left. And then the next day, they found that the protocol they were using in lethal injection were using drugs that were 5 years past their use by date. And a nurse who saw it blew the whistle. So for the rest of last year, up till now, there's been a moratorium. And it's like, come on. We can do better than this.
yes, we definitely should.
Yeah.
I'm going to wrap it up pretty soon. We have gone over an hour, and you have been way too kind with your time, so I do appreciate it.
Well, Ken, thank you.
On a happier note, you're currently working on something.
Yeah, there's always stuff to work on. And so I've got like 5 book projects to work on. Both Crossroads and Eve, 2 novels, are both on the slate for major motion pictures, which is pretty cool.
Do you normally focus on one book at a time, or do you go back and forth?
I go back and forth, and then sometimes just one book lands front and center for a big chunk of time. And it's just like, you know, it's like jumping in a river and see where it goes.
Yes.
So yeah, so there's all kinds of things, but you know, you have to learn to live inside just the grace of each moment rather than trying to create imaginations or agendas, you know.
Yes.
And if I die, it'll screw up my calendar. I'm just saying. So I'd rather just stay here and respond to what the real world has for me. And I think everybody should do that.
Well, I will say, you gave me a signed copy of your book when I was over that Labor Day for the pool party.
Yeah, really.
But yeah, it's you have made an impact in the world, and the best part about it was, from what I gather, again, you wrote the book for your kids. You weren't trying to do this. That's the best way that it could have happened.
It is the best way, and I don't need it. You know,
that's what I love about you. You didn't need it. You weren't seeking it out. But it obviously has impacted millions of people's lives.
Yeah.
So
I know. Who'd have thought?
It's beautiful.
It is. Thank you, Holy Spirit. We will have more.
Absolutely. Yeah. I do thank you for your time. This was incredible. Do you want? I guess is it also downloading on your computer or just mine?
It's just yours at the moment.
Okay. Do you want to review this before I publish it?
Not at all.
And then do I have your permission to put links to your work in the? Okay.
Sure. You can do whatever you want.
All right.
Makes it simpler for me.
Thank you so much, Paul.
You are so welcome, Ken.
This was an incredible conversation. I do appreciate it.
You're very, very welcome.